Well, you know, the cool part about doing what I do is that I get to meet people in the insect tribe just about every day of my life. But this week, of course, has been, you know, one of the epicenters here at ESA 2014. And the Insect News Network, we love to show the spotlight on the people behind the bugs as much as the bugs themselves, because it's not just about the bugs, it's about us, right? And the Beathon, of course, is all about the human-insect connection with insects and pollinators in particular. But this little epilogue to this week's broadcast is going to show the light on some of my favorite little critters that aren't insects. We'll get back to that in just for a moment. But for the first time, I'd like to say hello to our guests. This is Nancy Miarelli. What a lovely name. Nancy Miarelli.
Yeah.
This is Nancy Miarelli. And this is Rachel Olson. Yeah, I got the first names. It was just the last names I was working on. Rachel and Nancy are both definitely in the insect tribe. I met Rachel at the Tweet Up, probably the coolest Tweet Up I've ever been to.
It was a blast.
Yeah, organized by Gwen Pearson, who is the Bug Gwen, right? She's one of the best bloggers in the world, and she happens to be blogging about insects a lot. And that was organized by Richard Levine from the ESA. We got to meet all the cool kids. And then yesterday I bumped into Nancy because she had this lovely insect dress on. Yeah. That's right, yeah. So now we're going to talk about two things on this segment of the Beathon that maybe won't get talked any other time this week. First, we're going to talk about forensic entomology, and that's a topic that really intrigues a lot of people who like horror films, who like crime films, and generally are of that sort of a little more macabre, but definitely the investigative too. So tell people what forensic entomology is.
Forensic entomology is just a branch of forensic science where you use insects or arthropods to settle cases that are either criminal or civil. And so while most people think of like bones or CSI, forensic entomology has a whole other kind of more boring structural aspect where if you get an apartment and there are fleas in it, ahead of time, who's responsible? A forensic entomologist would investigate the biology of those fleas. Or if you find maggots in your sandwich, a forensic entomologist would be called for that too.
Help you if you do.
Yeah,
just throw it out. That's my entomology.
Forensic entomologist, there's a really wide range of what you can do, but most people just focus on like murders.
The dead bodies.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the two reasons you should know is that, first of all, it has applications in almost every field of human endeavor. There was a huge incident last year where they helped solve a crime case where people had stolen art artifacts down in Mexico, some ancient Mayan relics, and they were able to use the domestic beetles to track them down, right? Isn't that how it happened?
I don't remember that case that specifically other than what you outlined. But yeah, forensic entomology is used in all sorts of really crazy things just like that.
And tell them real briefly, if you could, why insects are such important indicators in the decomposition of a body, for instance.
So the body goes through several stages of decomposition. It's an ecological term called succession. A lot of people just think that succession is like trees recolonizing a field, but that same process happens in dead bodies. And so that process is fairly predictable. And what makes it even easier for us is that insects are cold-blooded, so we can very easily track their development based on the temperature at the crime scene, so we know exactly, or at least pretty close, how long the body has been exposed to that environment based on that successional process, the insects that are present, and that life history and that life biology.
Great explanation, yeah. And every insect species that shows up, it's called succession because they come in different waves. Often it's the botflies first, right? They're the first to show?
The blowflies.
The blowflies, sorry, the blowflies. They're always the first because they have this amazing sense of smell, and the human being starts to put off
chemicals.
Yeah, I think it's one of the acids, right? The uric acid or something like that.
Yeah,
right, the first
so there's actually a poster in here that I took a picture of but didn't actually have time to read, and it said, is there a pheromone that people release? And there isn't one, and that's what that poster was on that I haven't quite read yet.
Well, blowflies show up, they lay their eggs, and then the next round is probably a beetle, right?
So there's actually a bunch of different flies. You have the blowflies first, then the flesh flies, and you sometimes get houseflies on the body as well. And then that happens when the body's still like really liquidy and really goopy and like dripping fluids. Yeah,
cool.
it's super awesome.
Gross, but cool.
And then you get the beetles after that are feeding on the fly larvae or the maggots. fats.
I see.
And then after that, when you pretty much don't have much liquidy or fatty tissue left, and you just have like hair and skin and bones, and you have the beetles that specialize on dry material, like the dermestids.
And the dermestids have to do with museums too, right?
Yep.
Because part of forensic entomology is preserving all the wonderful museum specimens that have live tissues, and dermestids are employed in that aspect.
Yeah, and that's actually why we use them, to get rid of those extra tissues in museums.
Amazing. Now, before we get back to talking about your guest here on the show, because we have 3 guests on this segment of the show. Gil Grissom, perhaps the most famous forensic entomologist of all time, the romantic lead of the most popular television show of the 2000s, which was CSI.
Yeah, it was my favorite.
How
Gil
about
Grissom
that?
was my favorite character.
You know, he was such a powerful character that they actually started a forensic entomology program at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, because of how popular the show was. And that show, just so you know, this is in my book, the final viewing of that show was the most watched television show in history. 80 million people around the world watched that. And he was a bug guy. Go figure. Now, the other very special one involved probably one of my favorite movies of all time, maybe yours too, Silence of the Lambs.
Don't really do horror.
Okay. Well, as an entomologist, there's no movie that comes close. There's so many examples of entomology in that movie that are accurate, and some of them that are a little misleading, but they're all very, very spooky and well done. But the important part is that when you get to things like the life cycle of humans, the idea of ghosts, spirits, the afterlife, soul, things like that, there's certain insects that always kind of make their presence known, right?
Yeah.
Cockroaches, moths. Dragonflies and spiders are very prevalent too. So let's turn it over to Rachel now. Now, Rachel, you have just you're here. I met you at the Tweet Up, and your specialty in entomology is what?
Non-bee pollinators.
The native bees,
flies, wasps, butterflies,
awesome.
Bees,
beetles, some beetles,
a few beetles. Not really honeybees at all. More unmanaged bees.
How about that? So most people think pollination, they think pretty much butterflies and honeybees.
Right.
They forget about the other 20,000 species of bees. But what is your favorite non-bee pollinator?
Oh, I really like syrphids.
They're my favorite.
They are so cool.
Hoverflies. They might be the most fun insect on the planet, don't you think?
They're so cool.
They're super cool. They're very territorial, so you can hang out with them and they get to know you. They don't live very long. They're really interested in people. They seem to be. They show as much attention to you as they do their flowers. Their larvae, very important beneficial predators, right?
Yeah, definitely.
They control the soft-bodied insects and aphids. But there's something about syrphid flies that's playful, that kind of is,
they're very, playful is a good word.
Yeah, they bounce around and they're kind of dynamic. Hey, we're going to talk about the Cal Academy next time I see you. And if you're not going anywhere, let's talk right now. All right. See you, Dave. Ice Beetle Dave. The Ice Beetle King. So now, let's take it to the other side. When I was, my first pet when I got out of college was a Mexican red-kneed tarantula who was born in Alaska, living in Georgia, and it was a male named Lucy. Needless to say, Lucy had all kinds of identity complexes, right? You are about to take on a new pet, so let's see if we can meet our new, for the first time being held by the new mama. This is one of the gentlest mygalomorphs on the planet, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Beathon 4 and more, so you've got to get to know the mygalomorphs. This is the tarantula, a Chilean rose. Is that what it is?
This is a Chilean goldburst.
A Chilean goldburst. What a lovely name. Now, well, I mean, goldburst is a pretty nice name to begin with. So,
it is pretty. I was thinking of maybe kind of borrowing a little bit off of the periodic table symbol and giving her a name that starts with AU.
AU.
So I was thinking maybe Aurelia.
That's a lovely name. And the short, if you ever need to get her attention, you'd be like, hey, you.
I also kind of like Linnea.
Linnea. That's a lovely
to
one.
Linnaeus.
Absolutely. Carl Linnaeus, the man who pretty much set taxonomy of the world as we know it into motion. May I?
Yeah.
So now the thing to know about mygalomorphs, and these are among the most primitive of all the spiders. They do spin webs, but it's usually just for their molting and egg reproduction. They don't usually catch creatures in them, but they're extremely gentle for the most part. Would you like to be part of this here, Miss Nancy? So as you can see, though, the ladies are experts in handling these creatures. They're just all about touch. They have very poor eyesight, and their entire world revolves around those little hairs sending them signals. Very, very reluctant to bite at any time unless they're really, really afraid. But they make fantastic pets. Now, how long do you think Aurelia Linnaeus is going to be around with us. Maybe she's got 2 names.
Oh,
so.
I hope for quite a while.
Did they not tell you how long they live?
They said that they can live between 18 and 40 years.
Yes.
Good.
So
That's a big, and imagine that,
It's a
folks,
big
having a pet
range.
that lasts longer than 3 or 4 dogs in a row.
Yeah.
And of course, the males don't. The males conk
Right.
out for about 1.5 years, and that's what happened with Lucy, my tarantula.
Mm-hmm.
They told me that he was a female, and then within 1.5 years, he was already falling apart. But hey, it happens to a lot of guys in the bug world. Did we get a chance to talk about your tattoos?
we didn't.
Okay, so this is why this meeting was meant to happen, because as you know, my favorite way to identify people who are in the insect tribe is to talk about tattoos. And as soon as I met Rachel the other night, now let me just explain that. Why tattoos? If you're a long-time listener, you know that body art is one of the most profound instruments of self-expression in the human condition. There was one of the oldest mummies found in the world is named Lady Cow. And Lady Cow was found in the Peruvian Andes a few years ago. She was almost in absolute perfect condition. And she was an empress of a pre-Incan civilization. And she was covered head to toe, literally head to toe, in tattoos. One of them just coincidentally, that's the word I like to say, it's a coincidence. It's a coincidence that involves insects or spiders. Coincidentally, she had a large spider on her thigh.
Oh, she seems like she's getting a little nervous.
Okay, well maybe it's time to put her back in the box. So, and then after you do that, we'll talk a little bit more about your tattoos. So in the modern world right now, the new expression, self-expression, tattoos in America used to be taboo, and now they're really kind of commonplace. Do you have any tattoos, Miss Nancy?
I don't, but I do henna and jagua.
Oh, see,
Yeah.
you do henna, which is
Yeah.
temporary tattoos.
And jagua is it's an Amazonian fruit, and you do the same thing. It oxidizes in the skin, but it gives like the black inky tattoo color.
Oh, wow. And it lasts just a few days or a few weeks?
Yeah, it's a few weeks, about 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, and so right now, according to the Pew Centers of Research, 40% of Americans under the age of 40 have a tattoo. So that says there's a certain cultural shift around body art and expression, and the arts form has exploded in popularity and in refinement over the last 10 years for sure. So when I see people with an insect or spider tattoo, not only is it a wonderful celebration of their affinity for the microcosm, but the stories behind them are remarkable. Now, you have your sweater on. I don't even need you to take it off, so if there's no way to do that, that's fine. Is there anything you can show me that doesn't involve you taking the sweater off? Because we can always follow up and do it in another segment.
Yeah, no, I don't have any that don't require lifting clothing.
Okay.
I mean, I've got plenty of tattoos, but my insects are all hiding.
Generally, the Beathon is PG. We sometimes go R. Is there any G-related, or is it all on the back? Or is
They're all actually on my sides, and
Okay.
there's one on my chest.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. So, everybody who's watching with kids, here, we'll do an interview like this, okay? So, okay, why don't you tell me about them, and then maybe we can get some pictures to put them in.
Yeah, I've got photos.
Okay, good.
So I have actually just a tiger swallowtail.
Lovely.
When I was a kid, my parents used to do like the butterfly kisses on my nose.
Those little eyelashes on your nose, yeah. Huh?
Yeah, and so then there was also like the Eskimo kisses, rubbing noses together. They called them Eskimo butterfly kisses.
How about that?
So ever since I was really little, I thought that was a cool idea, and I spent a summer working in an entomology lab that had a very beautiful tiger swallowtail mounted. And when I looked up more information on it, I found that their range extends into Alaska. So I thought, it's an Alaskan butterfly. Look at that.
Those gorgeous creatures can fly up where it's cold.
Yeah, so I was pretty excited to find this butterfly, and I had actually just finished a scientific illustration course. So I spent my lunchtime during that summer drawing this butterfly.
Oh, awesome. So it's your own art.
It is my own art. It has been slightly modified. My artist was...
Now it's got fangs like
yeah. No, he had to remove a little bit of the detail to make it so that it wouldn't turn into a blob after a while.
That happens with some tattoos, for sure.
Yeah, so I started with one.
So you have a tiger swallowtail, and then what else do you have?
8 more tiger swallowtails.
Oh, you have a whole colony, a whole flock of... all your insect tattoos, tiger swallowtails?
9 of the 10.
9 of the 10. And what is number 10?
The 10th one is just sort of... it's a butterfly, but it's not any specific butterfly. It's a very... I don't know.
A general speak.
Yeah, it's sort of a general butterfly. It's just a line drawing of what's a representation of a butterfly.
Why was that one different?
So this one actually, stemmed from, I spent a lot of time studying yoga, and I've also done a lot of henna, and my very first tattoo is the Om symbol. If you're familiar with yoga, you're probably familiar with Hindu culture. But the Om is the sound that created and holds together the universe. And I thought that was pretty cool. That kind of resonated with me a little bit. So my very first tattoo is right between my shoulder blades. It was this Om. And a friend of mine is an amazing artist, and she built me this paper cut of 4 segments of an Om in the middle of a pink circle. And over 4 sections, the Om transitions into a butterfly, and the circle opens up into a lotus. So the butterfly is sitting on a lotus. And I've got photos of that.
Doesn't that just say it all, huh?
So she knew I loved the Om, and she knew I loved butterflies, and so.
And of course, anybody who studies spiritual traditions know that the Om is the sound you make to kind of recalibrate yourself to the universe. It's the breath of life. It's the sound of eternity. And all throughout history, the butterfly has been a symbol of the important 4 steps that every human being goes through. One of the few things we have in common: we are all born, we all live, we all die, and yes, we are all reborn somehow. And that is what the Insect News Network is all about. So I couldn't be more delighted to get that story. So Rachel, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And we'll have to get those pictures to see him up close. Nancy, it was a pleasure too. And just before we go, I always have to ask all my guests on the show, do you have a favorite insect or spider?
It is so hard, but right now I'm kind of leaning towards the orchid mantis.
Nice. First one of the week, one of my faves too.
Yeah.
Definitely. It was definitely, oh, by the way, the bug of the year, you can look right above the link on the video and vote for There, really, ladies, I promise. You can vote for your bug of the year. We're taking nominations this week, but then by the time, you're kind of like the Vanna White of the Insect News Network. That's remarkable. We have to have you back on. And you're from Georgia too, so I guess go Bulldogs. Okay. And then what's your favorite insect or spider?
Oh, I think my favorite today is probably a Bembidian. It's a genus of carabid beetle.
Oh,
and
the Bembidians.
There are a few that are just so gorgeous. They look very nondescript if you just look at them, but you get them under a microscope and they explode. They're so gorgeous.
I think that's the way it is about everything, folks. If you get it under a microscope, it's always gorgeous. And that's why I like to end every radio show with pretty much the same thing. Just remember, everybody, thanks for joining us on the Beathon. Thanks for tuning into the Insect News Network. You are all part of the insect tribe. You are strong. You are beautiful. You are perfectly you. And remember, as you go about your busy day, it's a big world out there, but most of it's microscopic.
True story.
Until next time, we'll see you on the other side of the horizon. Imagine that. Well, as you can rest assured, when you hang out with people who understand bugs, you are going to learn about every possible topic in the landscape of being a modern-day human. And in this booth right here, as soon as I saw it the first time a couple days ago, I knew I had to come back and talk to Rob. And this is Rob Harrell. Harrell, welcome to the Insect News Network, Rob.
Thank you.
Rob is a geneticist from the University of Maryland, and I guess I should welcome you to the Big Ten Conference as well. So,
yes.
Yeah, right? It's been a rough start, but it's hard to get started in the football schedule, right? You guys should have gotten started on the basketball schedule. But now, Rob's booth, as you can see, I'll step aside, is specializing in the transgenesis of non-model insects. So, for the person on the street, they might recognize some of those words. And could you, for the listeners, explain the distinction between GMO and transgenesis?
The genetically modified, basically you're modifying that organism to carry some other gene in some way.
Okay.
So transgenesis, you're taking a gene from somewhere else and putting it in.
I see.
Okay.
So I know the term is gene trucks.
Right.
Is that an old kind of outdated
That's
term?
That's kind of an outdated term.
It is,
but
okay.
Yeah.
So what's the new term for that?
A transposon would be a carrier, a vector of DNA. So something carrying it in. So a vector to carry that, whatever the cargo is.
So you put the gene into the organism, and usually it's designed to change the physiology, the mating behavior. What are the impacts usually?
It's to change something that the researchers are looking at. Mm-hmm. So we don't actually design those genes and those vectors. The clients actually design those based on getting the plasmids that already carry these vectors of DNA. Okay. They'll put in their gene of interest, and then they'll ship it to us. So what we're doing is we're not actually designing all that the client designs that, they give to us, and we help them with the technology. So they're not learning that technology in order to do what they would need to do in order to answer their question in their research.
Now, just to clarify, everybody, I mean, everybody, as soon as you hear of GMO, there's these huge debates raging at the highest levels of politics and social action. Everyone defaults to Jurassic Park, right? Because that's what most people know GMO is all about. This is very different from what they showed on Jurassic Park, but in some ways it's the same thing. Because explain basically how somebody would look at this sign and understand what it means to them as a citizen.
As a citizen, what we're doing is we're creating tools for a researcher to take back to their lab to use in their lab.
So you're not actually making animals.
We're not creating animals. It's an animal that's already existing. We're just modifying a gene in there. We may be putting a gene in there that will overexpress something or will knock something out, or you're putting in an enzyme that will modify, mutate a gene that's already there.
I see. So it's sort of what natural selection does anyway. Right?
Correct.
Okay, but you're amplifying it, you're being specific, and some of these results have been very profound. What would you say, out of the list of insects here, we got a whole list here of mosquitoes, beetles, flies, and other insects. Now, which ones, of course, this is the beeathon, so we'll talk about the honeybee last, but which ones from the University of Maryland have had the biggest impact in this work?
I would say the biggest impact in terms of transgenic insects that we have made, probably working on work from Leslie Vossal's lab. She works on odor receptors. So basically, they're altering the mosquito and looking at how that mosquito senses to bite specifically humans.
Very interesting.
If you're looking at, they don't work on Anopheles gambiae, but the Anopheles gambiae is the world's deadliest animal. So because of killing through malaria. So with Anopheles gambiae, it senses humans. You could have a warm-blooded animal there, and you could have humans, but that mosquito will specifically seek out humans for their blood source. So that being able to understand how that olfactory system works and senses humans, or to alter that system, or to create ways in which you can look for either attractants or for
that's big
repellents.
Horizon. They're finding a lot of natural fruits have extracts that can repel mosquitoes. This is cutting edge science. But now, every year we do the Bug of the Year, and everybody listening to the Beathon, just look at the link right above the video, and you can vote for your Bug of the Year. Last year, one of the top 25 nominees was the GMO mosquito from Oxitec. Now, that's a very controversial and very innovative solution. They actually released the mosquitoes into the wild in 3 or 4 countries around the world, and right before it got released in Florida, there was a big hullabaloo, as you can imagine, and they did not release them in the United States. But with that in mind, that kind of research is important because we're running out of solutions on the chemical frontier, aren't we?
Yes. I mean, you're getting resistance to all the chemicals that are frontline against mosquitoes to kill those off, pesticides. They get resistance. So with these molecular solutions, you're able to kind of work on the mosquito and understand its biology and maybe design better chemicals also. So it's not just making a mosquito that may be refractory for malaria or making a better mosquito. It's also looking at ways in which you can design better attractants and better repellents.
Learning how the mosquitoes and all the other insects communicate is essential to this sort of tete-a-tete that we do with them. But they're not going away. That's the one thing everybody's got to get right now. Now, the perspective I take oftentimes is that I know that there's things going on in laboratories that are impacting the wild populations. I also know that the wild populations have benefited from some of these things. For instance, the gene they manipulated at the University of Minnesota to enhance the cleaning behavior, which has shown a propensity to keep out the varroa mites. What about U of M? What have you done with bees?
We haven't done. I initially, back in the early days, I was in the lab that helped. That was one of the developers of Piggyback. And in the early days, we were trying to get this to work and see how many insects it could actually work in.
I see, okay.
And so we did a little bit of investigative work with honeybees. But we didn't have the bees that we were working with. They weren't living without us working on them, because you have to pull those embryos out of the hive. You have to manipulate those. So getting the bees to actually accept those, or the queen, the workers to accept those back, is really a difficult challenge.
They're a much more complex society.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
So with that, it becomes a much more difficult problem to work with, because you're dealing with social insects that are working on these.
Sure.
But the honeybee has been transformed. It has been made genetically modified with transposons. This is work done this summer. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the lab that did it, but that was just published this summer.
I see. So if you had one message to send out to the listeners about transgenesis, from the thing of how to ease their concerns, like, what is the distinction? What is the big misunderstanding the general public has that they need to hear to understand how advanced the science is?
To allay their fears about the technology?
Well, yeah, because people really are seeing Frankenstein things, but we know that the sciences are there's always a question mark with research. There's always a question mark of like, what is the ultimate application with any sort of technology. And if you don't believe me, folks, just ask your cell phone carriers where all your old cell phones wind up, right? That's something most people don't want to talk about, right? So as far as GMO transgenesis goes, what is the thing that you would say to somebody to allay their concerns?
Most of this work is not for release. It's mostly for lab research, where these particular strains of mosquitoes are going to labs to look at the mosquito, to look at a specific question between how the host pathogen interaction works, or to work on some, as I said earlier, attractants or repellents. So they're really tools for research. They're not really something that's going to be released into the population in most cases. I mean, I would say a high percent are just going to a lab to be reared in the lab and answer a specific question at that particular time.
Yeah, and I think ultimately at the end of the day, folks, it's not about is this going to happen or is it not going to happen. It's happening. And now it's a matter of everybody rallying around the right protocols and getting elected officials who can write legislation to navigate these things, because it's happening.
And working with the public so they have a better understanding of what's going on when they go to, in some cases like Oxitec, releasing these, having a good educational portion of that, so that the public understands that this is not a huge problem. This is not a dangerous situation.
Well, their solution is quite sophisticated, and we'll cover that on another segment of the Beathon. But if you want to know why it's so important, especially for things like the malaria thing, just go visit the places where malaria is rampant, and you'll get an understanding of why these people are working so hard. So, Scott, appreciate your time. Welcome. Thanks for being on the Beathon on the ENTSOC News Network. We're going to continue with part 4 of the 4th day of today here at ESA. Imagine that. So this isn't really an epilogue anymore. This is just a continuation of the Beathon 4 and more from the ESA 2014 here in Portland. And as you know, on this show, we're trying to take the broadest look possible at the full human-insect connection. But even if we did that, we would be eliminating a huge number of creatures on the planet. It would be such a limiting thing to say just the human-insect connection. Let's say the human myriapod connection. That's creatures with many legs. And my next guest here on the show is from the Buckeye State as well. So go Bucks. Right. There you go. He lives he's working at the University of Arkansas now, so he's a displaced Buckeye. Now he's a Razorback. And this is Derek Hennen. Welcome to the ENTSOC News Network. Try that again. This is Derek Hennen. Welcome to the ENTSOC News Network, Derek.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you aboard. Yeah. And he was referred to me by Richard Levine, who's the communications director for the ESA. And Derek has a specialty that is probably one of the more unique choices as far as a career path goes, but it's to study these demure little creatures that are just about all the way around the world, and they play a role that is absolutely essential in the ecosystem. We're talking about millipedes. Tell us a little bit how you got to study millipedes.
It's an interesting story, but I had the opportunity during my undergrad to attend a workshop taught by Bill Shear, who is a millipede researcher from Virginia.
Okay.
And so it was a weekend full of just learning about millipedes, which is a group that I had just never really known anything about. And so that kind of got me started, taught me the natural history of them, how to identify them, things like that. And since then, I've just kind of run with it. I've connected with other millipede experts like Roland Shelley, who's based in North Carolina and has done a lot of important taxonomic work with the group. And so what I want to do now is sort of take everything that's been published with them and kind of all the natural history information and kind of synthesize that into field guides and better identification materials. That way that anyone will be able to identify these guys, because for the most part, if you go and ask any entomologist, they don't really know much about millipedes because they're not trained in it.
And they're fairly ubiquitous. I believe they live on every continent, but except Antarctica.
That's true.
Right. And how many different species of millipedes are there in the world?
In the world, there's an estimated 17,000 species.
17,000?
Yeah. It's a good amount.
Amazing. And some of them are very tiny, and there's the giant millipedes, which are,
you get from just a couple millimeters to a foot long with the African giant millipede.
There are some that are millimeters long.
Mm-hmm. There are these interesting little millipedes called pincushion millipedes. And so it can be about 5 millimeters long, and they're called this because they have these little hairs all over their bodies that they can use to kind of deflect ant attacks. And they live in the leaf litter, under bark, and they're just the cutest little millipedes.
Pincushion millipedes. Look it up, folks. We'll post a picture during the interview. Now, a better question is, how many people around the world are millipede experts?
That's a good question.
Probably not that many.
Not too many.
Yeah.
I'd say in the U.S. we have about a dozen. I'm not as familiar with the international workers, but every few years there's the International Congress of Myriapodology, which brings together workers on millipedes, centipedes, other things like isopods.
Oh yeah,
and so that's relatively well attended.
Isopods are pill bugs, and we talk about pill bugs all the time on the show. Now, I'm a huge fan of millipedes because I definitely think they're one of the gentlest ambassadors in the world. They're slow moving. They're very shy. Generally, they'll either roll up into a little ball or they'll poop in your hand, and it's never that toxic anyways. Are there any that have any wicked defense mechanisms?
A lot of them have just wonderful chemical defenses, which are very, very interesting. And so in the United States, especially in the Appalachian Mountains, we have the hotspot of biodiversity for that family in the world. And so it's the family Zystodesmidae. And these are commonly called the cherry millipedes. And that's because if you'll you can pick them up, and then you can kind of shake them around in your hand. And then if you smell them, it smells like cherries because they're releasing...
They're so gentle. Even their defense mechanisms smell nice.
But that's actually cyanide that they're releasing. And so it's a very good anti-predator defense that tells anything that's trying to eat it, don't do this, you're going to die.
I see. So it's a warning and it's a nice smell. It's aromatherapy all at the same time. Now, the other thing I think some of our listeners will know, there's a couple topics that I've covered a few times. The millipede has a distinction in the insect world. Now, we talk about shamanism and indigenous wisdom and ethno-entomology and these ideas, and that's the idea of, shamanism generally is people consuming plants for sort of mystical experiences, but there in fact is one millipede in the world, isn't there, that has a chemical in it on the island of Madagascar that the lemurs seem to be rather enamored by this one particular. Why don't you tell them about this millipede?
Yeah, and so it's found in Madagascar. I believe it's an endemic to the island. So the lemurs will then take these millipedes and kind of bite them a little bit to get them to use their chemical defenses. And if you ever read a news report about it, they'll kind of report it as the lemurs are getting high off of these chemicals.
And they are, and so no doubt about it.
They'll kind of ingest them, and then they'll start acting a little bit loopy.
Yeah,
it's
their
very
eyes
strange.
get glossed over.
Yeah.
And they take the chemicals and they wipe them all over their body, and they wipe it in their face, and then they'll start kind of doing this kind of thing. And the videos are really hysterical, because lemurs are very high-activity creatures.
Oh, yeah.
High metabolism, very alert a lot, very socially aggressive. And once they whip out, what is the genus of millipede that does that,
Oh, I don't know for those ones.
It's funny, though. I mean, you can watch the videos online, but they bite the head of the millipede to scare it, and then they'd sit and just roll the millipede around like rolling a doobie, and then they have a good time. So now I've never done this myself. I just read about it, right? So now let's bring it back full circle. So you're a millipede expert. Does that enable you to dive into appreciating the whole microcosm?
Oh, definitely. Whenever I'm out looking for millipedes, I'm always paying attention to what trees are around, kind of where streams are nearby, because millipedes need these moist areas to live. Yeah. And so I get the fun distinction of even though I'm an entomologist, I never really carry around an insect net because I don't need it.
Yeah.
I'll take a little rake or something to kind of move over the leaves to uncover the millipedes, and I have a great job because I just kind of get to go and walk through the forest.
Go play in the dirt.
I'm not usually where it's very hot like some other people I know, especially those who work in agricultural fields.
Sure.
So I get to take these nice strolls, find these beautiful millipedes.
You don't have to chase your subject.
That's right. When you uncover them, they just curl up and stay there. So I can get my camera out, take some nice photos of them, and then collect them.
So let me just paint a picture to show people how important millipedes are. What happens if there's a forest in the foothills of Tennessee, the Appalachians, for instance, where all the millipedes disappear? What happens to that forest?
It would be in trouble because you have all this leaf fall from the trees, and millipedes are an important component of taking these leaves and breaking them down as they're eating it, and then they're breaking them down into these little pieces that then fungi and bacteria are able to digest, can take those nutrients to be returned to the environment, and then that eventually becomes soil. And so in some areas of the U.S., this kind of litter digestion can be a very important component. Like in the Pacific Northwest, there is a tribe of millipedes that includes Harpathi.
That can be tribes. How cool is that?
And they can digest up to about, it's an estimated 35% of the leaf litter there.
Wow.
We also have in the eastern U.S. one of our largest species, Narcissus americanus, the American millipede, and it's almost like a fertilizer machine. It's been estimated that in 1 year, an adult can poop out about 2 tons of fertilizer into the soil just from digesting these leaves.
Wow, I'd never call him a shithead, but that's some serious poop production.
It is.
You know what I mean? 2 tons
they
from
mean
one
business.
little critter. Yeah, only Washington politicians poop out more crap. So now, at the end of the day, if you have one message to give the other people watching the Beathon, everybody in the insect tribe, what would you say about the work you do?
I would say that I would like people to be able to connect with it. That's one of the driving forces behind my work. And so I would say that next time you're out taking a nature hike or anything like that, kind of stop, roll over some logs, push some leaves around, see if you can find some millipedes and really sit down and take a look at them. You can find these just absolutely beautiful specimens out of these black and yellow or red.
And they're great to introduce kids to the natural world.
Oh, kids love
they're
these.
They're very slow, they don't bite, they're very gentle.
They're harmless.
And how many millions of years back do the modern millipedes go?
They go back to the Silurian, I believe. They're one of the first groups of invertebrates to leave the ocean and come onto the land.
Hear that, folks?
The largest millipede that's ever been found in the fossil record is called Arthropleura, and it was about 6 meters long. If you go to
18 feet of millipede, folks.
If you go to a natural history museum, like the Field Museum, they have this just huge replica of Arthropleura in some of their dioramas.
Amazing.
And you just see it, you could ride it like a train.
And we know that fossil records are not the biggest there ever was. So even though we found one that's 6 meters long,
we still don't know what else could be out there.
It was probably 7, 8, 10 meters long, and we just didn't find the fossil yet. So that's why you hang out with people like Derek here, because life is fun, life is fascinating, and it's endlessly available as soon as you know where to look, right?
That's right.
Very good. Well, thanks for being on the Beathon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And how about that? We'll follow up some more about millipedes. Now I know when I need to know about millipedes where to go, so that's cool. Imagine that, folks. 300 million years of detritivores, and we can see them just every day of the life. Just flip over the log. On the Beathon, imagine that. We'll be right back. A quick little part 2 with Mr. Derek here, the millipede expert on this year's Beathon. I live in the Sierra foothills right now, and Derek pointed out to me that there's 2 very special species in the world of millipedes that bioluminesce. Tell me about them.
Yeah, and so in California, we have 7 of the 8 species of millipede worldwide that has true bioluminescence. So they can glow just like fireflies. They produce their own light.
Very cool.
So they're found in the Sierra Nevadas, and in addition to that, many of the millipedes in the order Polydesmata can also fluoresce under UV light. So you can literally just go out into the forest at night with a UV light, kind of shine it over the leaves, and you'll see these little blue-green tractors crawling over the over the leaf litter.
Now, bioluminescence is important not only because it's beautiful, it's a fantastic source of biomimicry inspiration, because the bioluminescent light is very efficient, isn't it? It's
and not only that, but with these millipedes, there have been studies that show that their bioluminescence is aposematic, and so it acts as a warning to predators not to eat them because they have those defensive chemicals. And so they've done experiments where they had the actual live millipedes, and then they also had clay models that they painted with bioluminescent paint versus non-bioluminescent paint, and they were able to show that the ones without the bioluminescence were attacked more often by predators.
Crazy.
And so even though it shows predators where they are, that's actually helping them to be able to survive and not be eaten.
It's a fascinating idea, and the reason bioluminescence is special is because it's a chemical reaction inside the creature as opposed to phosphorescence or fluorescence or iridescence, which is usually a coloring thing.
Right.
Well, phosphorescence that could be as well, but bioluminescence is it luciferase? Is that the chemical?
So that's what fireflies use.
Yes.
But in millipedes, it's a little bit different. And the glow that they use isn't quite as bright as fireflies. It's more of a diffuse. If you've ever seen honey mushrooms that bioluminesce,
yes,
it's a little bit brighter than that.
Cool. So it would still work at a big dance party on the dance floor, right? Or like a good display at a party.
Millipedes would be great at a rave.
You heard it. You heard it here first, folks.
I mean, just telling the truth.
That's the next party we're going to throw, a millipede rave, right here on the ENTSOC News Network. Imagine that. Ding, ding, ding.